So let's start with us. So my name is Raj. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Novvum.
My name is Rohit. I'm the other co-founder and CTO of Novvum.
Yep, and we're here to talk about going from hell to GraphQL. Actually, we should probably name it From Hell to Toronto.
Yeah.
This talk is about a company called Hyrecar. And Hyrecar is basically a car-sharing platform for carless drivers who want to drive for Uber and Lyft. It's a lot of words, very confusing, but they were actually growing quite a bit. In late 2017, they actually approached us, and the conversation went something like this. Fix our web apps, and we were like, sure. And it was a really simple job. We basically were told, hey, migrate our Angular apps to React, or our Angular app to React. Little did we know, though, that this Angular app was actually two apps, and it was a driver-based app and an owner-based app, much like Uber. And they had their own specific user-specific actions. And not only was this just Angular, this was actually Angular v1, or like the Angular JS, whatever, the one without type safety. And something that we kind of had an idea has like maybe had some offshore roots connected to it. But we were like, whatever, we can get through that, right? But that's when we kind of caught our first glimpse of hell.
Yeah. So let's play a little game, right? We're gonna call it Guess the Response. So what do you guys think these two endpoints do? The offers one, just
scream it out.
Shout out. Promotions, okay. Well, it was actually publicly available cars that drivers could browse were the offers endpoint, and the cars endpoint was actually specific to the user, right? So the owner's cars. Instantly we're like, wait, what?
I thought it was like coupons or something.
Yeah,
offers.
We're like, okay, let's give this the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what these things actually return, right? So this one seemed pretty straightforward. This is the offers endpoint, right? They're giving us some basic, after we figured out what offers was, some information about how to display those cards. And then this is how it was for a specific offer, right? This is like 120 different fields. 50% of those weren't even used, that we found out later. And then some of them were really confusing, right? Like my day and then ML day. I had no idea what that meant, so there wasn't really much versioning or anything. So my guess is that they had done something before, and then they just layered something on top, and a lot of chaos there. So this was kind of consistent across all the endpoints, right? And then there was no documentation. So we were like, okay, well, why don't we go and ask the engineers, right? Well, it turns out that their one engineer at that time was there for about a month, so he had no idea what this was. So we're like, okay, I guess we have to just sniff the network of the old app and try to figure something out, right? So we said, okay, this is going to be a pain, but let's get through this.
And so we ended up taking those two Angular apps, making one single interface with React, and that was pretty successful. And actually, Hyrecar approached us to fix their mobile apps, which basically didn't work. Literally, people would go from registration or sign up and just crash. And they would actually, most of the user flow would end up in a salesperson or an actual touch point, like calling them, talking to them, and signing them up manually versus doing anything over the internet. So this was very lean to a kind of a little too much degree, I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty bad. And then we started hearing signs of an IPO, fast forward a few months, and we're like, oh, well, I'm not going to make a joke about that. And basically, their servers were having errors, their clients were having errors, not the React one, but the iOS and Android. And they wanted to build new clients that would connect to a more robust API. And they also wanted to in-house an engineering team instead of offshore any more development. And essentially, they went shopping, and they asked us, and we said, sure, okay, you know what? We'll help you guys out. And then they told us we have approximately 60 days, and then we're like, okay, we can try, make for a great talk, so So we immediately thought GraphQL. We've been lurking in the GraphQL community since its public release. We call ourselves the extreme lurkers. We've been there since like GraphQL JS, went to Scaffold, like talked to those guys, helped them out a bit, and then we went. Now we're like with Prisma and Hasra and like AppSync, all these amazing tools coming out. But we were like, this is an easy scenario. We can just wrap the REST API, have it talk to the clients, and
Yeah, so this was kind of the standard approach, right? We were hearing about this quite a bit of a lot of different companies doing this successful. So we're like, okay, no big deal. We can do this. 60 days, we can just try to wrap the REST endpoint, and we got a good feel for what it was like when we built, the front end app. And so the steps are pretty straightforward, right? Just define the schema, at least a rough version of it, start wrapping it, connect the different clients to it, and then hopefully we can maybe migrate it over to a native GraphQL endpoint if we wanted to. So we went ahead, we defined the schema. We're like, okay, this is great. We're making good progress, and then we hit the REST endpoints, right? So let me give an example of what happened, right? So let's say we have a car type. And so here, if we wanted to get data for this, there was a couple of issues that we ran into. Number one was there was 2 different ways to fetch something, and then we get inconsistent data between the 2 different endpoints, so we weren't sure which one to trust. The second issue was that in some cases, some endpoints would return a subset of the data, another endpoint would return another subset, so we'd have to figure out some way of mixing these together. And that made no sense to us, but we said, okay, would this actually work for the clients? And so when we tried this out, we found that actually no, because they can't really query for it in any meaningful way without losing a lot of performance. And so that would completely defeat the purpose of GraphQL. So we thought, okay, well, what if we just fix the REST API? Maybe we added a few extra endpoints that gave us some of this data in a nicer way. So we said, okay, well, why don't we take a little peek under their code, right? What could go wrong? So turns out a lot could go wrong.
yeah, this is just one file. This is an authentication script. I had to fold all the fields so I can fit it onto the screen. But yeah, it contains everything from direct database calls to third-party services, they're doing emails and everything, sending that all directly. They were exposing keys too, which we hid. And they were layering a lot of business logic, which made it really difficult for developers to come in. So they had a huge problem with developer retention. So they would actually get some talented developers. They would throw a lot of cash at them, basically. And they were for a few months, and they just basically looked at this, and they're like, no, there's nothing we can do, sorry, and then move on. So yeah, it was confusing. And then if we actually look at it, this was kind of like the monolith of monoliths. I don't know how to explain it. It was basically like a monolith that ate other monoliths, I guess. But yeah, the API itself contained 1668 directories, 7,336 files, and we were talking about that average of just around 1,200 lines per file, written like that. So we also had crons, around that many crons, which we didn't know if they were still in use. A lot of them were rogue crons that were still running on the server. And they didn't want to turn it off. We're going to get into the database pretty soon here, but they didn't want to turn it off because they didn't want to mess with the data. They felt like they were still doing something. I have no idea.
So we thought, okay, well, we can't use this REST API. It's not salvageable, right? But what if we just try to fetch the data directly, and then we'll just try to build out the business logic, right? So we said, okay, let's take a look at the database. So here's a little screen cap of what that looks like. And if it looks confusing to you, you could only imagine how we felt. Basically, there were 145 tables, no foreign keys, so we had no idea what was related to what. And more than 50% of these things weren't even being used, right? Like there was those cron jobs running. So if you like tried to do anything with it, it would have probably caused a lot of issues. And you know, it got up to over 50 columns a table in some cases. So it was pretty much on the brink of disaster there.
So yeah, technical debt was too damn high.
Yeah.
And we were
yeah, we were like 55 days left. Oh God.
Yep. And we thought, okay, let's come up with an idea, right? Like, let's work with the CTO. He probably knows, he was most familiar with most of the relevant data in the database, and we would just work with him to figure out what data we needed to migrate and what was necessary. Then we would work with, we just scrapped the API, screw the API. We couldn't like even read it. It was just, you know, that if you actually like calculated 1,200 lines and 7,663 files, that would probably take up all the 55 days, right? So we were like, okay, let's work with the heads of each like domain for business logic and figure out what's really necessary to get the users through this flow, right? And
yeah, so the first thing was we had to figure out how to get this database under control. And basically what that meant is get rid of it and build a new one, right? So there were a few requirements that we had going forward with this. We don't want to be making direct database calls, right? We'd want an abstraction layer. We wanted to simplify how we manage the database itself. And of course, ideally, we would like to be able to support different types of databases, right? We don't want to be tied into a single database for everything. You know, and of course for encapsulation purposes. But that's when we ran into Prisma. They had actually been released maybe out of beta about a week after we made this promise. So we're like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, it was like, we were like really lucky because during that time, you have to remember it was like early 2018. So nothing was really out there. And we were kind of like, okay, do we have to build something from scratch? And then this came out and we're like, oh, this is perfect because this keeps like all of their developers from touching. Like there was SQL injections and stuff. We're gonna talk about that soon.
Yeah. So it gave us a really nice client, you know, in a number of different languages. We were using TypeScript at the time, so that was really helpful for us. And of course, multiple database types. At the time, it was just MySQL, but they had plans to support all these other ones as well. And of course, the development experience was really great for us. So for example, this is how we would go and make a request to database, right? So this is done in native TypeScript. We could go and fetch a certain user or update that user in this way without having to teach, you know, having to have different types of databases and writing languages for those things. And so finally, let's go into the API itself, right? So we figured we can get the database migrated. We'll go and handle that part of it. And now we've got the other problem of rebuilding this business logic and going through that.
So basically, what we found out was when we spoke to most of these heads of each domain, each of these domains had very separate like things that they cared about, separate services that they talked to. For example, the insurance had different providers that they talked to, which had a totally different, like some of them had like XML APIs and stuff like that that required very different data sets. And the user service was mainly a lot of like approvals, rejections of like motor vehicle reports and such. So more like, you know, admin related type of tasks.
So we said, okay, this is great. We know we want to encapsulate our data. We should also modularize our business logic as well. So we said, okay, in order to enforce this so the previous issue doesn't happen, it's better to actually keep them in individual packages, and they're the ones who have access to the data. And so we said, okay, that's great. That's what we'd like to do. And then we could go and use a GraphQL layer to talk to these different services, right? And we had seen a lot of these big companies who would have these services independently deployed. We said, okay, that'd be really cool, right? But we have to realize that we were a pretty small team at that time, like less than 25 engineers, and it wasn't going to get much larger. So we followed some really great advice we had, and we said, okay, it's actually better to package these up individually and avoid all of the maintenance overhead, the operations overhead, as well as some of the networking costs that would get incurred. So we said, let's keep it as a single modular server, and then we can go and scale it horizontally and so forth. So for this particular use case, that made a lot more sense for us to say, keep these under one server.
Yeah, and it made for a lot more like of a productive environment for developers, especially the new one that was coming in. Like there was a day and night difference for him when he saw this structure versus the one he was used to working with, which was like, again, like a bunch of different files that he didn't know where to go to for help. So this kind of kept each domain sort of isolated and at the same time productive.
Yeah, so this is kind of what the end result looked like, right? It's very simple. So you've got your clients, and then you've got the gateway API, the GraphQL API, and then the data layer with individual databases, which you then go and connect to the databases. So this actually worked out really well for us, but the question is, did we make it in time?
Well, I mean, of course they know. We're doing a talk about it. So, yeah, and we were able to accomplish a whole new database. Like we were 100% on our database migrations. So it was funny because the first time we migrated, right, the CTO actually came to us. They were doing a bunch of QA, and they said, hey, you have too many users, or you have too many this, you have too many that. And we were like, we're pretty sure we did everything right. So we started over. We actually like did this live, like we actually put it live like at 1 a.m. or something. And so we switched them, and then we had to switch it back, and then we had to switch it back the next day, right? So it was like 2 all-nighters for us. And it turned out that the data that they were looking at was actually data they had missed and their API had never caught. So these were users that signed up and they never knew about them, right? So we had like caught a lot of people that they were just missing. The other thing was obviously the GraphQL Gateway API. We also did a new admin portal for them. We migrated obviously the React app to GraphQL. We also did an event gateway for third-party integrations, which is a whole talk on its own. So we'll probably post that someday. But we all did this in less than 60 days. And the aftermath was pretty amazing. Obviously, Hyrecar had a successful IPO. They also had this crazy user growth, so it was over 500% from May to today. And if you actually look at their user growth over time, it was pretty stagnant. They started in 2015. They were probably around like 20 to 50K in 2015, 2016. And then it was very like this slow staggering rate for the next year, and just a huge boom for them. And one of the cool things was the reliability of this. It still hasn't had any like major crashes. It was kind of funny because like whenever we would see anybody from Hyrecar, like and they were there to talk to us about some new feature or whatever, they would always like go to the side and they would always like answer their phone, and we're like, are we gonna talk about this feature? And they're like, we have to take care of this fire right now, so that takes later priority, right? So it's really amazing to see their culture change from a development standard as well. They actually had very little developer retention. They currently have 25 engineers right now who love the environment that they're working with. They love the auto completion features and everything that Prisma gives and TypeScript gives. Obviously 100% or over 100% of coffee consumed by our team within the Orange County area, probably.
So I wanted to kind of show an example of something. So this was an operation to approve driver's background check. And this was all done in PHP, right? And so there was like a bunch of front-end logic interlaced with this. So there wasn't, at this point, I think they just gave up, and they're just like, okay, let's just put it all together. And so now we're actually able to have a nice API which does this. And we're Novvum, we've named things poorly.
Yeah, if we look back at that mutation, admin approved drivers BGC. Yeah, we were kind of following their old convention, so. But yeah, we named things poorly.
And yeah, this was another one. So again, this was booking a request, right? Making a booking request. So we had to send a lot of irrelevant fields to the back end because, again, the layering of the logic. So we had to build a little bit of a wrapper to make this work. And somehow we made it work before. So now we got a much nicer implementation here. Just past the fields that were necessary. And for the front end engineers, it's been very helpful. And one thing we wanted to note was
the transactional information.
Yeah. So this was the payload that we had was defined as an interface, and so this gave us a very unified way of returning any errors and success codes and so forth.
And it was good for, like with errors, like with GraphQL, if you just send back an error, it doesn't really give you that much information on the client. So actually, James Baxley at Apollo gave us that tip to basically always send back some sort of transactional information that kind of keep your clients sort of in the know-how of what's happening with the API, right? So yeah.
And also we had some new, so we decided, okay, after this, we need a little break. So they hired on some new engineers to build their native iOS and Android apps. And the most interaction we had to have with them was to explain to them how the schema worked and how to navigate that. And then after that, they managed to be able to figure out everything they needed. So we didn't really need to do much back and forth. So it was very, improved our performance pretty well.
Absolutely. And we had to thank our team. And this wasn't our team. This is just our names put into different stuff. It was just us three. So myself, Trevor, who is not here today, and Rohit, who basically spent many sleepless nights to get this 70-person, how much is 80 people in that company before IPO get their whole entire backend basically migrated. And we obviously have to say thank you to our significant others first, because we pretty much spent the whole time just in this bat cave, just coding. And obviously to our partners as well. Prisma and Apollo, they've been very helpful, and so has the GraphQL community. There's a couple of things that I want to put out there. GraphQL complexity, which obviously during the last talk we talked about directives, but complexity has been a really great tool for us to use as well, especially with all the admin related tasks. And GraphQL Gen and all those things like that. And last thing is OK Grow. Thank you so much for hosting this event and calling us out. It's been a really long journey for us, but we made it. So, and yeah, serverless too for the event gateway stuff. Shameless plugs. We do have a couple of projects that we've been actively contributing at. GraphQL Playground, Nexus. We actually took some inspiration from GraphQL Voyager, and we had actually some conversations with APIs Guru, and they said that basically, they're really busy, so there's not really going to be any feature addition. So we wanted to kind of take on that task of building a visualizer for GraphQL schemas, kind of like a training tool. And
yeah, please check it out.
Yeah, exactly. And Marvel QL, which just use it before we get sued. So, yeah. And again,
one thing I forgot to mention was a community member. His name is Alexi. He reached out to me with the 3D version of the bird's eye. So I'm just really excited to see people wanting to do this. So just wanted to give a shout out to him.
Yeah. And again, I'm Raj, co-founder and CEO of Novvum. And this has been From Hell to GraphQL.